Well, now we're going to multiply radicals, so you know how to use the distributive property. We'll multiply root 15 times each of these terms. And keep in mind, when you multiply root A times root B, that equals the product of the square root of A times B. So now, this equals root 15 times root 5 is going to be the square root of 15 times 5. And this minus sign, and that 3. And now we have the square root of 15 times the square root of 3v, which will be 15 times 3v. Now, this equals the square root of, and 15 is 3 times 5, and we have this factor of 5. So here we have 5 squared, minus 3 times, and 15 is the same as 3 times 5 times another factor of 3 times v. Well, we've got the square root of 5 squared, so that's just 5, and what remains under the radical? The 3 does, minus. And now we have the square root of 3 times 3, which is 3 squared, and the square root of 3 squared is 3, so we have 3 times 3, that 3 that came out from under the radical, and what remains under there is the 5v. So this equals 5 square roots of 3 minus 9 root of 5v, and we are done. Now we have to FOIL these two expressions contained in the radical, or excuse me, in the parentheses. So we have 5 root 2 times negative root 2m. So that's going to equal a negative times 5 is negative 5, and root of 2 times 2m. And we also have a 5 root 2 times 5 is going to be plus 25 root 2. Now we have a negative 1 times negative root 2m, and that'll be a positive root 2m. And now we have a negative 1 times 5, which is just negative 5. And let's see what this equals. So we have this negative 5. Underneath this radical, we have the square root of, well, excuse me, we have the square root of 2 times 2, which is the square root of 2 squared, which is 2 times 2. And what remains under the radical? Why, that m does. As far as the rest of these, they're all unlike terms. So we just get 25 root 2 plus the square root of 2m minus 5. And now let's simplify this. We get negative 10 root m plus 25 root 2 plus the square root of 2m minus 5, and we are done with that. For the final one of these, we're going to do a division. And the essence of that is we're going to get this radical out of the denominator. In other words, we're going to rationalize the denominator, get a rational number in the denominator. So we'll multiply by 1 in the form of our choice that will eliminate that radical. And since that's the square root of 5, and since the square root of 5 times the square root of 5 is 5, then we would be eliminating the radical in the denominator. So notice I multiplied by 1 in the form of root 5 over root 5. 3 root 5 times root 5. Notice, root a times root a equals the root of a squared. And by the way, I must put this addendum in. A is greater than 0. And so that just equals a. So root 5 times root 5 is just going to be 5. Upstairs, we have root 2 times root 5, which is root 10. And so in the end, we're left with root 10 over 15, and we're done.